The fire was already burning. We see the flames first, not as threat but as beauty. Dozens of torches fixed to the stone walls of a great hall. The light dances across embroidered tapestries, silver goblets, the faces of men and women gathered to celebrate. It is winter. It is night. And the castle pulses with music, laughter, and the rustle of impossibly expensive fabric. A young woman moves through the hall. She wears a crimson silk surcoat with sleeves that trail along the floor over a fine linen bliaut that covers every inch of her body down to her feet. A cloak rests across her shoulders, fastened by a golden brooch. She is the perfect image of medieval nobility. Every thread of her outfit speaks of power, wealth, and rank. Eyes follow her across the room. She has no idea she is wearing a funeral pyre. The story we are about to tell is not about war, plague, or famine. It is about something far quieter and far closer to home. The invisible price medieval women paid simply for dressing the way their world demanded. It is about how beauty, status, and fashion combined to create one of the most overlooked silent killers of the Middle Ages. If you made it this far, you're probably the kind of person who loves history told with real depth. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. A new episode drops every week, just like this one. To understand how this was even possible, we first need to understand the world these women lived in. Medieval Europe, from the 11th through the 15th centuries, was a continent lit by fire. There was no alternative. In the long northern winters, when darkness swallowed castles and manor houses early, flames were the only way to push back the night. Resin torches mounted in iron brackets lined the corridors. Candelabras holding dozens of tallow candles towered over banquet tables. Open hearths, enormous, unguarded, unscreened, filled entire walls in great halls and private chambers. Fire was not a decorative feature of medieval architecture. It was the condition of existence. In that same world, elite women's clothing had spent centuries evolving in one direction, down and out. Noble dress grew longer, fuller, more elaborate with each passing generation. By the 12th century, the bliaut, a long tunic of fine woven cloth, already dragged several inches behind its wearer. By the 13th, a sleeveless surcoat had been layered over the top. By the 14th, Burgundian fashion had introduced the hennin, those towering conical headdresses and gowns with trains that could stretch beyond 5 feet in length. Every additional layer of fabric was another symbol of distinction, and another fuel source waiting for a spark. The fabrics themselves deserve close attention. Silk, imported at staggering cost from the east along routes threading through the Mediterranean and the bazaars of Constantinople, was the most coveted material in European noble wardrobes. Lightweight, luminous, capable of catching torchlight in ways that mimicked fire itself. It was also extraordinarily flammable. Fine linen, used for the innermost layers of a gown, burned just as readily. Silk velvet, popularized in 14th century Italy and quickly adopted by courts across the north, ignited with a speed that contemporaries rarely described, because they rarely survived long enough to do so. Medieval dyers, in their pursuit of vivid and lasting color, used compounds based on tannins, alum, and organic substances that, far from slowing combustion, actively accelerated it. A crimson cloak dyed with kermes, a pigment extracted from insects that parasitized oak trees, worth its weight in gold, could catch and carry flame faster than almost any reaction could stop it. And then there were the sleeves. The fashion for pendant sleeves, which reached its peak between the 13th and 15th centuries, may have been the single most dangerous element of the entire medieval female wardrobe. Known in English as tippet sleeves and in French as manches pendantes, these fabric extensions could fall from the wrist to the floor, trailing freely with every movement. They were the most admired detail of the era, the most widely copied, the most frequently targeted by sumptuary laws. and they were in purely physical terms, the equivalent of wearing lit wicks strapped to both arms. All it took was one sleeve grazing a candle flame while reaching across a table, one careless turn near a hearth, one draft through an open door that sent a torch's flame toward passing cloth. Before we go any further, a quick question for everyone watching. Where are you tuning in from? Drop it in the comments. City, country, wherever you are. I'm always genuinely curious to know what corner of the world is watching a video about medieval fashion and fire on a Tuesday night. The medieval records that have survived to the present day. Monastic chronicles, manorial court rolls, wills, letters, mention deaths of women by burning in enclosed spaces with a frequency that is deeply unsettling once you start looking for it. The chronicler Jean Froissart, who documented 14th century noble life with an almost journalistic precision, recorded at least 2 incidents at French courts involving ladies whose gowns caught fire during festivities. Parish records from several English towns in the 13th and 14th centuries list deaths of women by accidental combustion, with a regularity that modern historians believe to be a significant undercount, because the death of an ordinary woman rarely warranted more than a single line in a burial register. The most thoroughly documented incident of this kind took place in Paris in January of 1393, at a celebration that history would come to call the Bal des Ardents, the Ball of the Burning Men. King Charles VI of France and 5 courtiers had disguised themselves as wild men, their bodies covered in raw linen soaked in resin and pitch to simulate animal fur, the men chained together at the wrist. When the Duke of Orléans brought a torch close to get a better look at the costumes, the resin caught in seconds. 4 of the 6 men burned to death. The king survived only because a noblewoman, identified in some accounts as the Duchess of Berry, had the presence of mind to throw the folds of her own cloak around him, smothering the flames. The episode is often cited as a colorful historical footnote. What rarely gets mentioned is that it illustrates, with clinical precision, the physics of medieval fire. The speed at which treated fabrics became walls of flame, the impossibility of reacting in time, and the particular cruelty of being bound, or trapped inside layer upon layer of clothing, when the burning started. For women, that entrapment was structural. A complete noblewoman's outfit from the mid-14th century consisted, on average, of 6 to 8 separate layered pieces. The inner linen chemise, the cotte, a floor-length tunic, the surcoat, a side-split overgown, the outer cloak, pinned at the shoulder or tied at the throat, the pendant sleeves secured at the wrist, the veil or wimple covering the hair and neck. For formal occasions, an additional train. The total weight of a silk and velvet ensemble could exceed 11 pounds. Movement was deliberately restricted. Carrying oneself with grace in such clothing required years of training, and running in it was simply not an option. When fire reached that layered ensemble, a woman could not free herself unaided. The knots, brooches, and fastenings that held the layers together had been designed to be undone by ladies' maids, not by desperate hands trying to tear burning cloth from a burning body. And the very instinct to bat the flames away, to smother, to cover, meant exposing the pendant sleeves, which would then ignite as well. If this video is making you see medieval history in a completely different light, hit the like button now. It genuinely helps the channel keep making content like this. Was any of this recognized as a problem at the time? Medieval people certainly understood that fire and fabric were a dangerous combination. The sumptuary laws that regulated train lengths and garment volumes occasionally cited practical concerns alongside moral ones. Some etiquette guides of the period included instructions on how to comport oneself near open flames while wearing formal dress. Certain women's religious orders adopted specific rules about handling candles in dormitories and refectories. But none of this amounted to a systematic response to the danger, because the problem, at its core, was political. The clothing that killed these women was precisely the clothing that defined them socially. To give up the trains, the pendant sleeves, the luxurious fabrics was to give up visibility, status, and standing in the rigid hierarchy of the feudal world. Medieval nobility did not wear those garments in spite of the danger. They wore them because the danger was, in a certain sense, the point. Clothes that restricted movement, that required assistance to put on and take off, that were ruined by any kind of manual labor. Those clothes announced to the world that the woman wearing them had no need to move quickly, no need to work, no need to run from anything, except of course from fire. Working-class medieval women, peasants, artisans, servants, also died in fires, often in the kitchens where they worked over open hearths and boiling cauldrons. But their clothing, out of functional necessity, was shorter, simpler, and far easier to remove. It was in the chambers and great halls of the nobility, where beauty was an obligation, and freedom of movement was a luxury rarely granted, that fire found its most completely dressed and most completely trapped victims. The Renaissance, which began reshaping European fashion from the 15th century onward, brought certain changes: more structured fabrics, rigid bodices that replaced loose layering, sleeves that gradually shortened and fitted closer to the arm. But it brought new dangers as well. Boned corsets could immobilize a woman just as effectively as any medieval gown. And fire remained. In the wax candles of cathedrals, in the hearths of Florentine palaces, in the lanterns of city streets. It was not awareness of the danger that changed women's clothing. It was economics, politics, and the arrival of new materials. Medieval fashion was not reformed out of compassion. It was transformed by other forces entirely, while the specific peril that killed thousands of nameless women remained unnamed, unmemorialized, unaddressed, left without a chapter in any chronicle that survived. We return to the hall. The young woman in crimson silk is still moving through the space, torchlit and beautiful. But now we know what she does not. We know the name of every fabric she is wearing, the chemical composition of every dye, the distance in inches between the hem of her train and the hearth burning against the eastern wall. We know she is not alone, that in castles and manor houses across Europe, on this same night, hundreds of women equally dressed, equally beautiful, equally trapped, are standing equally close to the fire. What she is wearing is a work of art. It is a symbol of power. It is the product of centuries of culture, trade, and refined craft. And it is, thread by thread, the most dangerous thing in the room. History rarely preserves the names of the women who died this way. There are no monuments to them, no dates on any calendar, no chapters in any history book. There are only the scattered lines in parish registers, the rumors embedded in chronicles, the particular silence that surrounds the deaths the world decides do not require explanation. But the fire was real. The fabrics were real. The castles, the torches, the unguarded hearths, all of it was real. And every time we look at a medieval illuminated manuscript and see a noblewoman with long trailing sleeves leaning toward a flame, we are looking, without knowing it, at the moment just before. If this episode showed you something you didn't know before, share it with someone, because forgotten stories only survive when someone decides to remember them.